Okay, welcome everyone joining this 2024 methodology improvements. I suggest just to give one moment for some people to join. Meanwhile, I will check also if all speakers are already here to make sure that we can proceed fluently. And just in a moment, we could begin. So I just ask to hold your patience just for one moment. Thank you. Okay, so I believe that everything is set up. So thank you very much for your patience. My name is Lucas Gallikas, and I work as an ERA 2024 project manager at ENTSO-E. And today it is my pleasure to welcome you here in this workshop on the methodology insights of ERA 24. And together with me, we have a number of experts joining to present you the material. But before I introduce them to you, I would like to first start very quickly with some basic housekeeping rules for today. For your information, this webinar is recorded and it will be published on our website, so you can also recap today's presentation there. Then, one important thing about engaging and interacting with us. Please use Slido platform for our engagement. It's a common practice already for a number of ENTSO-E webinars. And here at the bottom of the screen, you can see a QR code, so you can even scan now. Or at the top right column, you can see also a code which you could use to connect to our Q&A session. You can post your questions throughout the presentation, and we will come back to these questions at the end of the presentation after all topics will be closed. We would really much appreciate if you could provide your name and company for the details there, as it is indicated with this small person logo in the middle of the right-hand side of the screen, so that we could also get to know you better. And also, in case there would be some open questions remaining after this webinar, that we could engage with you and provide some of the answers on those. Please do engage both for the most relevant and interesting questions so that we could prioritize those first. And we will also make sure that we could also catch those interesting and important questions, and to a certain extent, we will promote those as well. The Teams chats and hand-raising features will not be used, so please, again, do connect to Slido platform and engage with us on the platform. And now, after closing these brief notes on the housekeeping rules, I'm very happy to proceed with the agenda and introducing you our experts here. Today I'm just starting with the welcome speech and introducing Javier, who will make actually a proper introduction towards ERA 2024 framework. Javier is our steering group member from Red Electrica Spain, Spanish TSO, and we are. I'm very happy to have you here, Javier. So just in a moment, I will pass the floor to you. But before that, I would like to introduce also the other speakers, because after the introduction speech by Javier, we will have a intervention by Acer, and we have a pleasure and privilege to have Daniel joining us today. And there will be a presentation note made by Daniel on their perspective and focus on ERA 2024. This will be followed further by ERA overview and improvements by Gregorio from APG, Austrian TSO. And Gregorio is acting as a market study team convener in ERA 2024 project, and he will give a very clear and concise overview on ERA framework itself. This topic then will be followed by more focused session, and we will start a focus session with the flow-based domain preparation insights for core and Nordic region. And for this presentation, we have a duo. So we have Yasser, who will address general flow-based domain preparation framework and especially the focus on core region. And we have also Sophie joining us from Statnet, Norwegian TSO, who will provide more insights on the Nordic region. This is one of the big topics for us for today, and we are very happy to present these improvements compared to last year. Another big topic for us to speak today about is the weather scenario selection. This will be weather scenario selection, more specifically the selection for economic viability assessment study. This will be presented by Laura from Transnet TSO in Germany, and more elaborated also the reasons why we need this will be also given there. And afterwards, from this, we will give the floor back to Gregoria again to address this topic number 7 and 8 on EV improvements with hurdle premiums and revenue-based EVA, which is under the development at the moment, to a bit shed the light also about the prospects, potential prospects of the future eras. And after we will finish all these topics, we will take a look at your questions raised on Slido platform, and we will proceed with the Q&A session. It will be my privilege then to moderate this Q&A session, and I'm looking forward to give the floor for the experts to answer your questions. After which we will conclude this webinar and proceed with a brief note about the following steps. So this is a brief information on the agenda. Without further ado, I would then proceed with the following slide, which will focus now on the introduction by Javier, who is our steering group member. So Javier, if you can hear.
Yes, can you also hear me properly?
Very well. So thanks a lot for joining, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucas, for the introduction. First of all, hello and good afternoon to all the stakeholders that are joining us today in this very sunny and hot day, at least here in Madrid. My name is Javier Quintero from Red Eléctrica, where I work at the electric planning department, and I work on the grid development plan, also system adequacy assessments, both at European level and also national level, and in several other prospective analysis of the power system. As Lucas said before, I'm also very happy today to represent the ERAA steering group in this webinar, where, of course, we will provide some methodological insights of the ERAA 2024. And we are going to focus this time especially on some major improvements that we are working very hard to introduce this year in the ERAA product. But before that, Lucas, maybe if we can jump already to the next slide, please. I would like to provide some context on the ERAA. As you know, the European Resource Adequacy Assessment is a legal mandate established to ENTSO-E. And this assessment aims to understand how the security of supply could be affected in the next decade in Europe. This assessment was established by the Clean Energy Package, and its aim is also to support decision makers during the energy transition to ensure secure energy for whole European society. This is a yearly product, and we are currently in the fourth edition. Adequacy monitoring is normally a TSO's core activity, and this core activity becomes even more critical along the energy transition due to the electrification of economy, and it's also becomes more complex due to the system variability in a renewable dominated system. This is why we really need a European assessment like the ERAA, which is a globally and unparalleled analysis. For us, it's also very important to refresh that the ERA 2023 was the first approved edition, which supposes a very important milestone for, of course, the whole team that are working in the ERA, but also for the whole European electricity market. ERA 2024 builds on this ERA 2023 approved edition, but as usual, we try to introduce an evolution spirit by including continuous improvements from one edition to the other, always looking to enhance this assessment even further. And this is, of course, possible thanks also to the received feedback from our stakeholders and the collaborative framework that the ERA has established. For the results to be representative of the future, of course, a first or starting point, the data that we use must be as updated as possible. And this is why the ERA is also built on the latest pan-European dataset that reflects both national and also European policies. And all the data is consolidated jointly through TSO data provision and also your own feedback. No? This is a little bit on the context, but now I would also like to think together with you on the role of the ERA in the next slide. When we think of the ERA, we should not see the ERA as a forecast of the European power system, but a robustness check of how this system could be in the future. Lucas, sorry, can you pass to the next slide? Thank you. By saying this, what we want to say or express is that the identification of the risks itself and of course the drivers of those risks is the center of this assessment. And this year we are focusing on the target years 2026, 28, 30 and 35. We have to do this sufficiently in advance to allow, of course, decision makers and also stakeholders to take countermeasures in case it was needed. And here the national and the European assessments share complementary views that can assist member states when addressing supply risks and also support them when developing market measures, such as, for example, the possibility of introducing capacity mechanisms. But here the ERA is only one of the many tools that allow Europe to advance in its trajectory towards the net zero. And for example, inside the system development area of ENTSO-E, the set is completed with other two products, which you will probably know. One of them is the seasonal outlooks, and the other one is the TYNDP, probably one of the best known publications from ENTSO-E, although I have to say that it seems that the ERA is also taking its own space and lately, no? Lucas, can you move to the next one, please? So now, as I was saying before, in each ERA edition, we try to apply this continuous improvement or spirit. We know, of course, everything can be improved, even also probably the ERA 2024, but step by step, we think we're getting closer. And for that, this year in the ERA 2024 edition, we want to focus on three key technical areas. The first one of them is related to the climate data, which in this edition is based in a new pan-European climate database with a very important characteristic, that is that it's based on future projections instead of what we used until the moment, that was detrended historical data. We think this is a very important step forward in climate change representation that also allow us to understand better how the variability introduced by the renewables in this climate change impacts the system adequacy. This topic was already covered in the previous webinar that we held at the beginning of the year, and that you can revisit thanks to the recording. And today we want to focus on two additional areas that we will improve this year. The internal consistency between the two models that we use in our assessment has been highlighted by Acer as a critical point, and we are tackling these developments, focusing especially on the EVA model by working in parallel in two types of EVA. One of them is the traditional EVA we've been doing for the moment, the cost minimization approach, which is operational, but we are also improving, and we will see those improvements in a while. And on the other hand, we are also developing a revenue maximization approach, building, of course, on the experiences of several TSOs that already applied this approach, but trying to apply this methodology at a pan-European scale. We will later see with more details what we're doing there to bring the investment decisions and adequacy risks a bit closer one together to another. And as another major improvement area, we've got an improved cross-border representation this year, with very important advances in the flow-based market representation that will allow us to include Nordic region for the first time in the adequacy models, and also core region in the EVA, which is a new point this year also. And also another big improvement is that the domains have been computed based on the most updated grid models for each target year. So we expect to capture better the capacity or exchange capacity evolution from one year to another one. And for us, this is also very important because interconnections are a critical element for the European power system, because they allow us to use more efficiently all the resources that are available. So a better modeling is very important to better represent the real market, of course. On the next slide, Lucas. We also want to show a little bit the feedback that we've received coming from the input data consultation. Stakeholders provided their feedback on 4 main areas: data validity, data description, additional data, and additional clarifications were required. Although the additional clarification and data description are the main drivers of your feedback. Also received a lot of feedback from Acer on 3 main areas: cross-zonal capacities, demand-side response, and transparency and stakeholder engagement. Of course, you can consult all the received feedback because we publish all the feedback we received, and also how we plan to consider it. But in the next slide, and as a final point of my introduction, we also want to show some examples on how we are also going to improve, not only in technical elements that I was mentioning before, but also for us it's important to make improvements in the transparency and stakeholder engagement corner. And this year, in the post-consultation data publication that will follow after this webinar, we are going to introduce a few additional items. We already worked on this for the input data consultation, for example, by developing this new data visualization dashboard. But now we want to take it a step further, and we have migrated it to Power BI, which, for example, will allow us to, or will allow you to do a comparison between the pre and the post data that's available. Seeing that it was also a very important topic on additional explanations on how the data is gathered. We will also publish now the data guidelines that are used or are shared with the TSOs to let them know how we want to receive the data. So we hope it helps you to understand all those data points that the TSOs are providing, and that we're producing also centrally at ENTSO-E. And then, as additional data was also required, we also are going to publish this year for the first time new data compared to ERAA 2023. For example, the economic parameters, that was a topic that traditionally was only available in the final report. We're now going to share it with you after the webinar. And as a additional and last item, we also are making efforts to present the data in a more clear way, so it's easier for you to understand. And a clear example is, for example, the NTC data, the cross-border capacities, which are normally shared from both TSOs. And this time we are going to share the consolidated values that we will really use in our models. So that's all on my side. We really hope that all the efforts that the ERA team is doing behind all these improvements allow us to deliver a new edition of the ERA with full usability. We will continue to see all the details in the rest of the webinar. This was just a starting point, and now I would like to give the floor to Daniel, representing Acer. Thank you very much, and keep in contact.
Thank you, Javier. Indeed, Daniel, I see you have turned camera on. Can you try to speak?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Fantastic. We can hear you clearly. So please take the floor.
Thank you, Lucas. So I'm Daniel Ihastot, representing Acer. First of all, thank you all for coming. A great turnout, especially for an August day. And thank you, ENTSO-E, as well, for the invitation. Acer is approving the annual ERA product. So this is why I'm here. Acer has also approved the methodology behind ERA. So I only have here a few slides to highlight our thinking towards ERA and our main priorities. So we can go to the next slide with that, and our priorities revolve around the concept of consistency. So as you may know, ERA 23, so the previous ERA, was the first ERA that was approved by Acer and in use today. However, we have identified in the decision, in the approving decision, a number of improvements for the future ERAs. And these improvements are technical on one side and procedural on the other side, but the technical improvements that we recommend and that we pointed out on a higher level, they again, like I said, revolve around this concept of consistency, and it is because of the particular way ERA is implemented that by now you may also know it is implemented separating the problem into the problem of capacity expansion, as it is called, so investment decision, entry and exit decisions modeled on one hand, and on the other hand, the adequacy risk is modeled in the so-called economic dispatch. Now, when you have two separate modeling streams, you have to make sure that the assumptions that you use are consistent between the two modules. For example, the cross-zonal capacities that investors see in the capacity expansion module should be the same as the ones that the economic dispatch module sees when we look into the adequacy risk. So that was our kind of high-level point in the decision, and then a number of recommendations below. And in this at this time, I have one kind of example for that. One example, because this will be elaborated later by ENTSO-E. So we can go to the next slide. And the case in point is the climatic assumptions. And again, colleagues from ENTSO-E will talk about it, but I want to kind of give an example on what consistency is for Acer. So in this case, climatic assumptions, and indeed there is a new climate database which we much appreciate, but given we have this new climate database, we have to make sure, and this has been a big discussion in the previous era with the previous climate database, and now we're looking into the new database and let's say a new discussion on how to then implement the climatic assumptions into those two modules that I explained. And the particular challenge here is that in the economic viability, in the capacity expansion part, so the investor part, there are some, let's say, simplifications made. So not the full set of the climate assumptions are represented to cut down on complexity. while in the economic dispatch, a fuller set is represented. So how to make it consistent, that's the challenge. And I will not go into the detail, but indeed, this is technically not an easy task. You will hear about that. But for us, this is very important. And I brought to you just to highlight and to give an example what it means, consistency for the robust results. There are a number of other improvements that I will not list here, but we have listed in the decision. And I repeat, we see the ERA development as an ongoing process. So this is for the technical improvements. And then I have one more slide just to emphasize from our point of view the importance of this webinar and the webinars that are similar to this, the one that we already had, and future webinars where ENTSO-E engages with you, stakeholders. We see this as a crucial part of the process, and we see here as well a possibility to further improve this engagement. However, we do appreciate this occasion and all the other, right? But there is still scope for improvement, and one of those improvements is to expose more of the data that goes into the ERA model, and I'm conscious that ENTSO-E will talk about that. There is an additional batch of data that will be shared with you. So here I want to appreciate that towards ENTSO-E, and I would like to ask the stakeholders to pay close attention and be informed and look into the data, because this can only enhance the quality of the end product and also promotes the credibility of the results when we are looking into it, all of us concerned stakeholders with a different set of information and understanding behind. So that would be it. So in short, thank you again to ENTSO-E and all of you. For Acer, the consistency of the application of the ERA methodology remains the key, as well as stakeholder involvement, which we see today as a good example. Thank you, and I give the word back to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Daniel. Indeed, much appreciated your perspectives on the ERA, and we are very happy with the engagements with you on the constructive feedback and your independent views on ERA product, which essentially helps us also to proceed even further in various aspects here for the ERA project. So thank you very much once again for joining and presenting this material to also public stakeholders. Moving forward, okay, I see there was one more slide. Again, if there would be some questions, please do engage on Slido. I already see one question raised there, so thank you very much. It is anonymous, but I truly appreciate. We will address it at the end of the presentation. Now I give the floor to Gregoria, Market Study Team Convener. I see you are ready, so I just give the floor to you. And
yes, thank you, Lucas, and welcome to everyone also from my side. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure also for me to welcome you all today on behalf of the Market Study Team, which I have the honor to represent this year. I've seen many familiar names in the attendees, so I'm happy to welcome you back. And however, also very nice to see some new names and the interest towards the ERA product growing year after year. So the purpose indeed of my first contribution today for you is to give a quick overview on the ERA framework as a multi-step process. For the ones of you that are familiar with the product and maybe joined our webinars also the previous years, might be some repetition. Still, it's important, I think, to give indeed the framework, especially for the stakeholders that might not be super familiar with the product yet. On the other hand, I was reminded promptly by our project manager that we're already a few minutes behind schedule. So forgive me, I will be maybe quite fast on this introduction, but the slides will be available also for you afterwards. Shall you need to refer back to them. So Lucas, please let's proceed. First slide. Indeed, as I said, this is the general framework with ERAA. This is the very high level first overview to highlight with you also the dependencies we have and a little bit the different scenarios, the data we collect, the different key modeling modules that we have, and eventually how we retrieve the final results that you can consult in our report. Everything starts with the initial scenario, so the famous data that we collect from the TSOs, and that a good share of which are going to be published today for your reference and consultation. These data are taken as primary input for the first key modeling step that we have in the ERAA, which is the economic viability assessment, which will be also one of the focus of today's webinar from a methodological perspective. The key purpose of the EVA, I have another slide in a few minutes. It's also to refine somehow the initial scenarios that we collect from the TSOs, which, by the way, are of course reflecting also policy targets of member states and the national energy and climate plans. The purpose of the EVA is to refine this scenario with a more market-oriented perspective and assess the likelihood also of entry-exit decision of capacity. And the key purpose is that the outcome of the EVA will then constitute what we normally refer to the central reference scenario. This is also a term that is taken directly from the electricity regulations, as you may know. And the central reference scenario is then the actual scenario that enters what we call the adequacy assessment or the economic dispatch models, which is a term that you will hear a few times also later today, as the key purpose of our economic dispatch models or adequacy assessment is to produce eventually what are the adequacy metrics and the final adequacy results, which will give us an insight of the expected status of the generation adequacy of our European system, therefore the LOLE and ENS metrics that we are familiar with. So this is the whole overview, a few dependencies there, and therefore you can grasp a little bit the complexity of the whole process and the challenges some of which we are going to highlight also today in more details. The next slide I have for you, it's also basically the same overview with a little bit more detailed information. Therefore, as I said, I will not spend too much time on this, but basically, if you also keep in mind a bit the color scheme, we have on the left side the input data, the key input data that we use for the European Resource Adequacy Assessment, where we have, of course, generation capacities, data for cross-border transfers, so NTCs, but also flow-based, which is a focus of today, capacity factors for renewables, hydro inflows, hydro database, and temperature profiles that are used mainly also to produce the demand forecast, which are, of course, another key element of the assessment. These are, again, the data that you will find also published on ENTSO-E website in a more extended and also a refined version compared to the one that we already published earlier this year in March. As you can see, indeed, these are the key input data for the EVA assessment and also, of course, for the economic dispatch models. However, of course, the EVA will refine basically the market-based capacity that are available in the system. We produce the central reference scenario, as I highlighted before. The ED models work leveraging basically a Monte Carlo assessment where we have a number of independent climate data, so which basically can be summarized in the PSCD, so Pan-European Climate Database. This year, of course, as was highlighted also by Javier, we are moving to a full new database, this version 4.1, if I'm not wrong. And of course, these are then coupled or combined with the numbers of random outage patterns, random unplanned outage patterns, both for generators, so for all the, let's say, assets that we have in our models, and also for the cross-border interconnectors. And of course, if you multiply the number of climate or weather scenarios times the number of independent outage draws, you find the total number of Monte Carlo years or yearly scenarios that we simulate in the ED model, which last year, for example, were more than 500. And in the end, we do, of course, a statistical analysis of these results to extract the usual metrics. The most popular one we are maybe familiar with are the expected energy not served, which gives you an idea of the magnitude or quantity of energy that on average during a year the market fails to supply in each bidding zone. And then you have also the loss of load expectation, which is the same metric used to define the reliability standards, for example, which gives you an indication of what is the average number of hours during the year in which the system indeed fails to deliver fully the domestic demand in each bidding zone. And so, of course, they are both statistical metrics, and in the report you find also additional results like the P5, P95, if I'm not wrong. Good, that was the general overview, and now a couple more information specifically on the EVA. Yes, we can directly move to the next one, I would say. So as I said, the main objective, as the name suggests, is to assess the economic viability of the market-based capacity that we have in the system. This is not only required by the electricity regulation as such, but also it's very valuable as it brings insight on the impact that market-based decision of investor can have then on adequacy, meaning on the security of supply in Europe. It's quite a challenging, or I would say the most challenging assessment we have in the ERAA. How we perform it, well, as you see, as it was highlighted by Javier also, for the first time in this ERAA, we have two different approaches. One is the usual that you might be used to. It's the overall cost pan-European investment model, which is a stochastic complex optimization that tends to or tries to seek the overall cost minimization over the whole pan-European system. And this year we are developing also a revenue-based approach as also a new approach that we are testing. We will have, of course, way more details later during today's webinar. And the answer is, of course, what are the capacity that is likely to be retired, investor, and demothballed or extended in lifetime in Europe due to, of course, market-based criteria. With the next and final slide of the introduction is then a couple more information of the economic dispatch model. Probably you're very familiar, most of you, with this figure that gives a rather complete overview on what is adequacy. So the capability of the system to supply all the inflexible domestic demand hour by hour. So therefore we conduct a hourly simulation over the whole year, over, as I said before, more than 500 different combination of weather scenarios and random outages of generators and interconnectors. And of course, on the one hand side, we have the load, part of which is flexible thanks to demand side response. And on the other hand, we have the generation, which is, of course, traditional generation, for example, fossil fuel fired, but also more and more renewable integration, hydro. Of course, imports plays and interconnectors plays a key role there. And basically the main purpose of ERAA is, of course, to assess the generation adequacy and security of supply of the system up to 10 years ahead. Good. The final slide I have in this session is a bit of an overview of the key methodological improvements that you can expect reflected in the ERAA 2024 results, and also in more details in the report that will come later this year. I can quickly read through the whole list, but as you will see, many of these elements are highlighted today in the agenda for this methodological webinar. Some others were covered in the input data webinar. For example, the deep dive on the new Pan-European climate database was already covered, and I invite you to refer back to the previous webinar. In the published data, you will also find the updated KONE data and, of course, all the other input data that we're publishing, whereas today we will focus, as was highlighted already by Lucas, on flow-based domain, both core and Nordics, and their implementation in the EVA and ED models. Of course, we have also some additional EVA improvements that I will present to you today, for example, on the price cap methodology, on the forced outage modeling in EVA, also a few words on hydrogen assessed as expansion candidates. Of course, and the key focus of today are also the new methodology for the weather scenarios selection, also for the EVA, and some information on this development stream on the revenue-based approach. Whereas some other minor improvements in the general modeling you will find directly in the report later this year. Thank you, Lucas. I will then hand back the floor to you for the next point.
Thank you, Gregoria. Indeed, very nice overview. And as we promised indeed to all our stakeholders after the introduction and overview and ACER's intervention, we are now proceeding towards a more focused session. And the first topic will be on the flow base. And I give the floor now to Yasser. If you can, yes, I can see you and hopefully I can hear you. And then later on, we will pass the floor and I will ask you, Yasser, to give the floor then further to Sophie when the time comes. So now the floor is yours, Yasser.
All right, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Yasser Touidi here from Adequacy team at ENTSO-E, and also part of the market study team of ERAA, focusing this year on flow-based methodology. If you go to the next slide, just starting with an introduction of about the context. Flow-based is the approach used more and more in European electricity market, which is advocated by a Commission regulation on capacity allocation and congestion management. This regulation establishes a guideline on capacity allocation, cross-zonal capacity allocation, and it specifically advocates as the primary approach for flow-based to be used in day-ahead and intraday. But also, this brings a number of benefits to functioning of electricity market. It makes it more efficient use of resources. Not only that, it also makes efficient planning, both in transmission sector, but also for other market players. It makes the transmission capacity, the cross-zonal capacity allocation more transparent and non-discriminatory. It creates a level playing field among market participants in this context. There has been new advancements. So we had the day-ahead at core for some time now, successfully. There is a plan to include flow-based also in intraday actions, and also to expand core geographically and include Italy North as a included in core. Also in Nordic, we have a plan to go live of Nordic flow-based this year, hopefully. So considering this, this year we wanted to include more flow-based in our studies and make it better, make EVA and adequacy more consistent, and also include flow-based in Nordic for the first time. And in order to do that, in both of these regions, we calculate flow-based domains from the network models. If you go to the next slide, I will just briefly for the ones who may be not so familiar with these two approaches, NTC and flow-based. So basically, in just very simple explanation, in NTC, the imports and exports are agreed beforehand, before the market basically starts between TSOs, and because of that, the net positions of countries cannot reach to the level that by the physics of the network it's possible to reach. As you see in this example, our lines have 1000 megawatt capacity, but we cannot have the net position in zone C of 2000 because it's all this 2000 can come from zone A, and that is of course not allowed by the physics of the network. So the cross zonal capacity, the maximum exchange that is allowed, that is agreed between TSOs, in this case would be 750. So the net position of zone C cannot reach more than 1,500. But if we include the physics of the network into market, then we can reach this net position. And simply to model that, you have to have the PTDF matrix. So this is power transfer distribution factor, which says 1 megawatt injection in each zone. What would be the megawatt in the cross-zonal lines? But this is a nodal model. For flow-based, we have to translate that to zonal. So the PTDF becomes zonal PTDF, and maximum exchanges becomes RAM. I will explain them further later. And also cross-zonal lines are connects in this case, in order to also include contingencies in addition to critical network elements. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is an overview of what's going on in terms of flow-based in ERAA this year. As you see, we have two large regions modeled as flow-based. This year, for core, I will start with core first. This year we calculate flow-based all individually for each target, for all target years individually, as compared to last year that the flow-based was calculated based on one target year, and then we had artificial expansion, let's say, of the domains based on the NTC's developments during the for our target years. Also, we had two domains for winter and two domains for summer. We have kept this seasonal approach, but we have extended that to 3 domains. Also, in order to make more, to improve consistency between adequacy and EVA, we will include flow-based in EVA, but in a simplified way as compared to adequacy. So that means instead of 3 domains for winter and 3 domains for summer, we consider 1 domain for summer and 1 domain for winter. For Nordic, it's the first time we have flow-based, and we are planning to include that in the adequacy model. Also, all target years are the flow-based for all target years are derived in this case. A little bit a different approach, and instead of having different domains, an allocation of those domains into the model here for Nordic. Sophie will go through more in details, but we have a fixed PDDF, and the RAMs are updated every 3 hours. To focus more on developments, point by point. So as I said, core flow-based domains has been calculated individually for each target year. Nordic flow-based domains included. EVA will use simplified core flow-based domains, and this will bring consistency, as I said. And also we have these two domains at the same time in our model. And as you see in the picture in the left, they are having some common connections, common advanced public couplings. So these two domains are optimized together, let's say, and that is, of course, increasing the complexity of our model. But we are confident that we can handle that, at least in the adequacy model. Okay, I will go through the approach in core more in detail in the following slides, and I have divided that to 3 steps. One is forming the nodal model, creating the nodal model, and then calculation of flow-based parameters, and clustering and using and finding domains. And later on, we have an a model, artificial intelligence model, to allocate these domains for the ERAA 24 weather scenarios. So I will start with nodal model. As I said, we have the grid model is used. The most recent TYNDP 2022 grid model is used and is adjusted for each target year of ERA. Together with this, we have collected the connect list from TSOs in order to, let's say, develop our scenarios for flow-based calculation. We needed some dispatch set points, and for this, we used the previous ERA result for some representative climatic years that shows a good variation of different situations. And since our target years are slightly different, we accepted this relaxation, let's say, and used the 25 target year of previous ERA as a proxy for 26, and 33 target year 2033 as the proxy for 2025. The most important step in this step, the most important part in this step of the calculation is mapping. So we have to map generation, load, and external exchanges. We started with some assumptions on this. So we distributed generation based on the study zone and technology, and we mapped the result of the dispatch point with what there is in the grid model. Also for the demand based on study zone and actual load, and external exchanges, we look at the transmission lines between the region and outside the region, and used and found the distribution key, let's say, based on the transmission line capacity, and then the external exchanges were distributed according to this distribution keys. You have to make sure that your model is balanced for when you have the nodal model. So a lot of experts were involved in this step to make sure that we have a balanced nodal model. When we have that, we can go to calculation of flow-based parameters. If you go to the next slide, please. Yes. Okay, so we have to, so for the representative scenarios, we do a load flow simulation in order to see the flows over our critical network elements. Those flows are used in our clustering step. And as I said in the beginning, we decided to go for 3 winter, 3 summer by looking at the parameters of our clustering and some expert views on how many are seems to be enough for our case. So we ended up on 3 domains for winter and 3 domains for summer. But as I said, as a backup for EVA, which cannot probably, due to increasing complexity, accommodate this, we reduced that to only 1 domain for winter and 1 domain for summer. When we have our representative snapshots, let's say, or the result of the clustering, then we can go ahead with calculating the flow-based parameters, which are basically zonal PTDF and remaining available margins. I will start with zonal PTDF. So here we need to have, in order to, as I said in the introduction, in order to translate the nodal PTDF to zonal PTDF, you have to have a strategy for your generation shift keys to distribute basically the PTDF of each node inside the zone and see its effect on the zonal level. We decided to go for a easy approach of so our GSK strategy would be simply on Pmax, so the maximum power of dispatchable units. However, in a smaller zone, smaller zones with large nuclear units, we decided to deviate from this and exclude those nodes in our GSK strategy. For calculating RAM, so this is basically the available margin that you have on your cross-zonal lines. First of all, we have to reduce it. We have to reduce the reliability margin from the limit of the line, and that is basically according to the observation of this line, what has been the difference between the expected power flow of the line and what is the realized one. And we relied on TSO's feedback for this. And also, you have to also see how much is the loop flows, basically. So the flows that are coming from loop flows, you have to exclude that also from Fmax, and what remains is your remaining available margin. On top of that, we basically do remedial actions to increase the minimum relative RAM, and then we apply an adjustment step on the final RAM in order to make sure that all of our RAMs are basically more than 70% of the capacity of the line. If not, we add an AR. We add this margin to the RAM called ARM adjustment. When we have all this, we have also a pre-solve step, which basically removes all the connects that are already by other connects, and so if they are or not, they are not affecting our flow-based domain. This step is actually good, let's say, because it reduces a lot of our connects, and that is an important thing because it simplifies, it reduces the complexity of our models. At this step, because we had PTDF and RAM, we did a quality check and we looked at minimum and maximum net positions that each zone can have according to this calculation, and also max bilateral exchanges between zones. And we compared this result with the same indicators of previous ERA and also what has been realized historically in flow-based calculations in the market. Then if you go to the next slide, the last step is the allocation step. So based on this 3 winter, 3 summer domains and the result of zonal PTTF and RAMs for these domains, we trained our random forest model by the level of wind, solar, load, and hydro inflows in these clusters. And when this model is trained, you can use it in order to allocate, using the same parameters in order to allocate to new weather scenarios that you have in ERA 24. Before that, before using the random forest model to ERA 24, we did a quality check again, and we used the allocation. So we did the allocation. We used the random forest model, and we used the allocation on previous ERA, on ERA 23, and basically compared the result with previous ERA. This has also proved to be very good, and we have corrected a few things during this quality check, and we are confident that we have a good representation of the network by the new flow-based domains that we have for this ERA. I think that concludes my part, and yes, I will give the floor then to Sophie to walk you through what has been the calculation process in Nordic region. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasir. Yes, my name is Sophie Wagen, and I work in Statnett as a market modeling analyst. Today I will talk a little bit about how we have proceeded in the Nordics to extract flow-based domains for the 2024 ERA report, and which has been, it has been a little bit different from the process in core, and I'll try to explain why we were able to take a different approach. Then I'll talk a little bit about the underlying simulation and modeling assumptions, and in the end give an overview of the whole flow-based calculation process for the Nordics. Next slide, please. Yes, this, like Yasir said, has been the first time we delivered flow-based domains from the Nordics. And it's been a huge team effort with a lot of good cooperation between the Nordic TSOs as well as with the ENTSO-E. In the Nordics, we have made the choice to use a market model called SUMNet to extract flow-based domains. SUMNet is an integrated market and grid model where we optimize hydropower production and the whole energy market as a whole, or hour by hour, and at the same time calculate a detailed DC load flow with a full-scale grid model for the Nordics, including next in the calculation. So then the model can calculate flow-based domains directly in the model from simulations. And we've recently got new functionality in the model so we can extract these domains from the simulations. And Statnett and SVK already use this model for market analysis. Another part of the process is to establish a Nordic grid model for these simulations, one for each target year. These grid models are based on input from each individual Nordic TSO. Then the connect selection is another important part of the process. Each TSO calculates and decide on a set of connects. And here the main focus has been on border connects, but in Norway and Sweden we have also included some internal connects with cross-border relevance. Then testing has also been important to test along the way, both testing the updated grid and test in many iterations during the KNEC selection to make sure that we have chosen the right KNECs and on different input scenarios. So a key takeaway from this process, being the first time, is that the importance of the cooperation between the Nordic TSOs to ensure that we get a solid grid model. And this also has highlighted the complexity of doing these calculations. Then next slide, please. In the model, we have a 3-hour time resolution for the simulation. So the RAMs are calculated in this 3-hour block for all KNECs and for all hours. PTDFs are calculated for each target year, as they are static for the period. We were able to do this because we already have the load flow included in the model. For the input scenarios, we have based them on the most recent long and short-term market analysis performed by Statnett. The resulting domains for the ERAA 2024 are provided for one representative climate year. And we have chosen 1999, which is the average climate year and is representative in terms of consumption in the Nordics. And this is because computations are very complex and time-consuming, but might be evaluated again for next delivery. In addition, some assumptions, we have used minimum RAM of 20%. And a flat GSK strategy, meaning that all generators have the same reaction to a change in the net position. Then next slide. Thank you. Here is an overview of the whole process, which summarizes a bit what I said in the previous slides. We start by putting together an updated basis model with the row grid model for each target year and establish the underlying market conditions. Then we have multiple iterations between grid experts on grid modeling and KNEC calculation to calculate, test, and select the representative KNECs. And once we have the grid and the KNECs, we put them together in the market model with the updated market datasets. Then, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Then the simulations are performed in the market model for each target year. And the model then produces flow-based domains directly in the model, which are then checked by the TSOs to ensure the quality. And then domains are sent to ENTSO-E, where they are tested in simulations in market model Plexus. And the simulations are an iterative process, so we can go back and redo simulations until we get satisfying results that can be used for the ERAA assessment. So I hope this gave a little bit of an understanding of how the flow-based domain calculations are rated in the Nordics. Now I will give the floor to Laura to talk a little bit about weather scenario selection.
Thanks, Sophie. I hope you can hear me good. So, yeah, my name is Laura Torralba Diaz, and I work in Transnet BB. That's the transmission system operator in the southwest of Germany. And I think we don't have too much time, so I will start with the weather scenario selection approach. So first of all, I want to give a little bit of a background. So why do we need to select a subset of weather scenarios for the EBA cost minimization approach? So the reason why we need a subset of weather scenarios is because the EBA cost minimization stochastic approach is quite complex. So we cannot consider the full set of 36 weather scenarios simultaneously in a stochastic way. So we need to simplify the model size by considering only a subset of weather scenarios. Why do we need a new methodology, and why we are not using the methodology that was used for ERA 2023? This is because the methodology of ERA 2023 is based mostly on, or is using mostly results of ERA 2022. That was possible to do because both ERA, so 2022 and 2023, were considering the same climate years. But in this case, for the ERA 2024, we are using, as it was already said, a fully new PECD, so Pan-European Climate Database with climate projections. So the goal of the new methodology is just to select a representative subset of 3 weather scenarios. And with weather scenarios, I mean these new climate projections of the new PECD. And we have been investigating 2 different approaches. The first one was input-based, and the other one is the impact-based. And in the next slide, I will give you an overview of both approaches. If you can show the next slide. Thanks. So first of all, the input-based approach. The input-based approach is, as the name already said, it's based on model input. So in this case, on the residual law, which is calculated from the Pan-European Climate Database and also the Pan-European Market Modeling Database. And the selection of a representative subset of weather scenarios is based on the mean, the standard deviation, and also the peak of the residual loads. And these are clustered using a K-methods score methodology. And some characteristic of this input-based approach are that this approach is independent of the economic dispatch run, so it is easier to accommodate in the timeline. And it is also a tested methodology. It's based on a methodology that was used in TYNDP 2022, and it's also easy to replicate. Also, we can adjust the representativeness of the subset by adjusting some weights, so by giving some clustering-based weights to the selected weather scenarios. On the contrary, the impact-based approach, if you can click again. Lucas, thanks. Oh, yeah, thank you. On the contrary, the impact-based approach is based on economic and reliability results from the initial economic dispatch run, and the selection of the representative subset is based on 2 different, or we have been investigating 2 different scoring metrics. The first one is the minimum absolute error, and we have been investigating also the Basis time metric, but I will go a little bit more in detail in the next slides. And some characteristic of this impact-based approach is that it is dependent on economic dispatch runs. It's a little bit more challenging to accommodate it in the timeline of ERA, but we have the advantage that we can use multiple criteria, and we can also directly assess the revenues, which is actually a main driver of commissioning and decommissioning decisions in the EVA, so the economic viability assessment. And actually, since the impact-based approach is the approach that was also recommended by ENTSO-E and also by ESA, I will be focusing in this webinar only on the impact-based approach. So if you go to the next slide, we can take a look at the methodology of the impact-based approach. It consists of 4 different steps, and we want to ask several questions with these steps. So the first question we want to ask with the first test is, what criteria do we consider for qualifying a subset as actually representative of the full set? So we need to define the data set of the criteria that we are considering. The next question will be how many and which subsets are we going to test? So we need to generate the different subsets. As I have said before, we have a full set of 36 weather scenarios in ERA 2024, and we are creating a subset of 3 weather scenarios. So in this case, we don't have that much combinations. At least computationally, it is possible to test all the combination, and that is what we are doing at the moment. the next questions that we need to ask with the next step, that would be the scoring, is the, exactly, if you can click once. How do we assess if a subset is more representative than another? So we need to really define the scoring metric. And at the end, the last step of the impact-based methodology is actually just to do the selection of the weather scenario, which is actually the best subset of weather scenarios, the subset that best represent the full set of weather scenarios. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in this first slide, I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail the first step. So just the definition of the criteria dataset. So first of all, as I have already said, I'm explaining here the impact-based approach. So the criteria are model outputs, and we will have, so for every weather scenario and every criteria that we define, and also for each binding zone, we will have a single value as input for our selection, so weather scenario selection. So we have been working with 3 separately criteria data sets. So the first one is a set of economic and reliability criteria, and this includes average prices, price spikes, loss of load expectation, and also energy not served. The second criteria data sets we have been investigating are net revenues, so actual unit net revenues, which are extracted from the model results and are also aggregated. And the last criteria data set that we are investigating are is also related to the net revenues, but we have been working with a proxy of net marginal revenues per megawatt for several thermal technologies. And I want to add, before going to the next slide, where I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail this net revenues proxy, this is also the approach that has been recommended by ENTSO-E. So let's focus on this approach in the next slide, so I can explain it a little bit more in detail. So what we need for calculating these proxy revenues is, in the first place, we need to calculate the hourly marginal prices distribution. That will be the blue line, which is shown in the graphic above. And we also need to calculate the generation marginal cost of the technologies we have defined, so some thermal technologies. These are the dashed line that you can see in the graphic, and we are considering as revenues, so the differences between these blue lines, so the marginal prices, or the marginal system cost, and the generation marginal cost of the technology. So we will be considering, for example, for hard coal, like the area between the blue line and the black dash line as these revenues. And why are we doing these proxies? Because this revenue proxy actually allows us to estimate the potential revenues of a marginal megawatt of a generation that is added, or sorry, a generator that is added or kept in the system. So let's move to the next slide. Here, I want to explain you a little bit more about the scoring metrics that we have been working with. So one of them is called the minimum absolute error. And in this case, we will calculate the equation that you can see there for each subset and binding zone. That is the absolute error. And actually, what we are doing is just calculating the differences between the mean of the subset and the mean of the whole set. And we are considering this difference for in relative values. So that is the reason why it is divided by the mean of the whole sets, and we do exactly the same with the standard deviation, and we sum these both relative differences between the subset of 3 weather scenarios and the full set of 36 weather scenarios. And we sum these values for all criteria that we are considering. And if we do this, we will have for each subset just a score per binding zone. So the next step is just to sum the binding zones of the score of the binding zones. And in this case, we are doing a weighted sum. And the weighted sum we are working with now is a sum which is based on the positive residual load of the different binding zones. And at the end, we select the subset with the minimum absolute error. So this means with the minimum score. So let's move to the next scoring metrics we are investigating, that's the Wasserstein metric. In this case, we will, for each subset criteria and Biden zone, we will build cumulative distribution functions. You can see an example of two cumulative distribution functions in this graphic, but I will go a little bit more in detail in the next slide. But after calculating these cumulative distribution functions, what we do is, or what the Wasserstein distance is actually the area between different or between two curves. In this case, the cumulative distribution function of the full set of 36 weather scenarios and the subset of 3 weather scenarios. So the area between these two curves will be the Wasserstein distances, and at the end, the best subset is the one that minimizes the sum of Wasserstein distances for each criteria and Biden zone. So before moving to the next slide, also this Wasserstein metric is also the approach that is also recommended by ENTSO-E. So let's take a look a little bit more in detail at this. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So again, we have here the graphic a little bit bigger, so I can explain it now in a little bit more in detail. So this graphic that is shown here is only for illustrative purpose. It does not show any outcomes of the weather scenario selection for ERA 2024, but is for you. So I can explain what this metric is about. So the gray curve will be the gray one will be the cumulative distribution function of the whole set of 36 weather scenarios, and the black one, as you can see, has less steps. So it's the cumulative distribution function of the subset. In this case of 6 weather scenarios, but like I said, this is only for illustration purposes. And the Wasserstein metric or distance will be the area between these two curves. So below we have two graphics where we can see two examples. For example, of a good candidate, a good subset of weather scenarios. We can see that the area between the both curves is quite small, and in the right part of the slide, we can see an example of a bad candidate where this area is quite big, so it will be not a good candidate or a good subset for represent the full set of weather scenarios. So if you can click one more, exactly, thank you. I want also to add that if the criteria that we are considering are not in the same range of values, of course, we need some kind of a standardization, and we are using a quite simplified and standardized one where we are subtracting the mean of the sets and we are dividing it by the standard deviation. And also to add here that if we are applying any kind of a standardization, then we need also to sum the Wasserstein distances of the Biden zones also in a weighted way. So similarly to the minimum absolute error. So let's go to the last slide, where I will show you some results. First of all, I will be showing some outcomes of preliminary calculations. These are preliminary results. So, and the one that I presented here were calculated following current ENTSO-E's recommendations. So this means that the weather scenario selection that I'm going to show is based on the impact-based approach. The criteria data sets that was used was the net revenues proxy. The scoring metric is the Wasserstein, and we are weighting the Biden zones based on the positive residual load. So if you can click once, so we can take a look at the results. So we have here two different columns. In the left one, we have the sum of net revenues for all weather scenarios for the target year 2030. And in the right column, we have the sum of the net revenues for only for the selected weather scenarios, also calculated for the target year 2030. The orange square is the average of the set of all weather scenarios, and on the right side we have the average only of the subsets of selected scenarios. And as you can see here, the selected weather scenarios will be in this case 14, 25, and 28. But before giving the floor again to Gregorio, just again to highlight, as these are preliminary outcomes, we are still refining the weather scenario selection approach and also validating it. So thanks. So then I will give the floor back to you, Gregorio.
Thank you, Laura, for the great presentation, and also Yasser and Sophie beforehand for the flow base. As you see, quite some condensed information, and one after the other. So let's take a break maybe to digest, and we jump now to the EVA topics again. What I have in this session for you is some additional improvements that we are including in EVA this year, and also some more information on the Hadoop Premium methodology. Of course, as it was explained before, 2 key improvements for EVA are secured by means of a new methodology for the weather scenario selection, and also inclusion of flow-based market coupling. However, we were also active with the expert team in other different fronts. The reason for this, to give a bit of a background, it was highlighted also by Daniel from Acer, that of course we do have to introduce, due to the high complexity in the overall cost EVA model, quite some additional simplifications compared to the economic dispatch models. On the other hand, achieving a higher consistency between the 2 type of models is of course of key importance, as it was highlighted before. The strategy here, of course, as we always try to address specific sources or root causes of what we can call indeed inconsistencies. We try to act directly at the root elements, for example, flow base, as it was highlighted before. And the approach is, of course, that this year we also focused on forced outage modeling, where there were some differences, or there are still some differences between EVA and ED. And also we improved on the price cap calculation methodology, and also we reviewed a little bit the technologies that we include in the EVA as expansion candidates. So we can move to the next slide, which basically gives you an overview of these 3 elements. Of course, there are also minor improvements or changes that you will find naturally in the report and that are not discussed in more details today. If we start with an overview on the novelties on the maximum price cap calculation, as you know, we need to, I have some details later, but we do calculate an estimate of the harmonized maximum price cap increase over the model horizon. This is very important for EVAs. The methodology is not substantially changed compared to ERA 23, but of course we can this year leverage the full set of results from ERA 2023. And also we improved substantially by moving to a multi-target tier approach. Therefore, we rather apply the same methodology, but leveraging the results from all target tiers of ERA 23. We'll explain this in the next slide. These, of course, will allow us to improve the robustness of our price cap estimates, since we can then reflect the underlying evolution of the system a bit better by taking price estimates from different target tiers over the horizon. The second point highlighted here is indeed about expansion candidates. The general, the general framework of EVA will stay the same. So we will focus again as expansion candidates, as in ERA 23, on natural gas blend technology, so CCGT and OCGT, but also grid scale batteries and explicit DSR units. Additionally, we assess the inclusion of some hydrogen fire CCGT and OCGT candidates, but specifically only for the areas where this inclusion allowed to overcome policy limitations that are imposed to gas expansion. For example, this is well-known case of France, as it was discussed also last year in more details. Whereas for most of other areas, this is not required, because even from a theoretical assessment of the screening curves, according at least to the assumption and the set of input data and commodity prices that we have for ERA 24, still in the model horizon, gas blend fire technologies are economically more competitive than hydrogen candidates. Therefore, it means that including both candidates, it's basically useless because the model would never invest in hydrogen fired technologies in the current horizon as long as there are no limitation in gas expansion. The last element is forced outage modeling. Of course, the traditional approach as of last year was to have average derating of capacity for generators, for example. This is because similarly to weather scenarios, also in overall cost EVA, we can also not reflect the same number of forced outage samples, which can go up to 15 or 20 even in the ED models. This year, this had an impact also, as we highlighted, on specific areas where we have, for example, big units or a low number of generators. And this year, therefore, we are pioneering a new methodology that transfer one representative outage sample from the ED to the EVA model. This is, of course, aiming at improving the consistency between EVA and ED. So let's jump to the next slide. Some more details then, as I mentioned, on the price cap methodology. This is, of course, it looks visually quite complex, but we hope that the visual will help actually understanding the approach. And it's, as I said before, it's not different from what we leveraged in ERAA 23. Simply here, you can see the first row. It's actually telling you what results or price, let's say price distribution, hourly price distribution from the ERAA 23 results we used to estimate each target year of ERAA 2024, which are in the second row, and the actual target years are highlighted in red. And the approach is very similar. We exogenously estimate the evolution of price cap. We based, of course, the assessment on scenario A, so the central reference scenario of ERAA 23, post EVA, obviously, and of course, the key idea of the methodology is to create a sequence of climate years, as we are still talking about ERAA 23 results here. So we were having climate years from 1982 to 2016. We create a sequence, in this case, of 3 or 2 climate years, depending, as you see in the table above, if we are using 2025, 2028, 2030, or 2033 results from ERAA 23. We create these sequences that repeat themselves, of course, for each individual forced outage sample that we have in our Monte Carlo analysis to create a very high number of possible, again, price scenarios of consecutive years that mimic a proxy for the evolution of actual target years. Then, as you see in the second representative chart on the bottom right-hand side, we would have per each of these sequence of scenario, in this case, for example, from 25 to 27, a certain evolution of price cap, so a certain number of triggers of harmonized price cap increase that we can then average to estimate finally what would be our expectations for the maximum price cap on each target year individually. And then, of course, we can put sequentially the different target years to have a continuous evolution over the model horizon. Some key assumption, we started, of course, from the current value, which is 4,000 euro per megawatt hour. This is, as usual, we take in ERAA the single day ahead market approach. And of course, we follow strictly the rules that are according to ACER decisions that were reviewed not long ago, and they're also linked in the slide for your information on what price spikes can trigger or not a price cap increase. Of course, there are very specific rules that are reflected in our methodology. As you see, have a look at the results, and also for your convenience, a comparison with ERAA 23. We have, in general, definitely a lower estimate of price cap evolution this year compared to last year. The main reason is that the key differences is also not only that we use this multi-target year approach, which is better suited, as of course we have in general, as you also see in the results, a lower number of price cap trigger increase on average moving farther with the horizon. And also because, of course, we are using now ERA 23 results from scenario A, which if we compare with ERA 22 results that were used for the price estimate of ERA 23. Scenario A, last year we had, of course, revised weights on the climate year used for EVA with the higher weights on 1985 and extreme year. So in general, the market, the EVA results delivered higher market capacity in the results of ERA 23 in comparison to ERA 22, and therefore there are in general a lower number of price cap and therefore price cap increase in now the estimate for 24. I hope it was sufficiently clear, but of course feel free to ask questions shall you deem necessary. And then I would move to the next slide, Lucas, which are of course a couple more details in the forced outage modeling. Also here, this is rather a bit technical, so I would not focus too much in details, but the idea is that we want to improve the methodology of forced outages in the EVA, but of course we are very limited in what we can do, as we don't want to increase the complexity since we are already introducing flow-based modeling and other elements. So here we still keep one single representative outage pattern, but instead of using an average derating, which was the previous approach, we will then select a representative sample from the 15 or 20. This will depend on the, of course, convergence criteria of ED models, but we will select a representative sample from the ED and directly transfer it into the EVA model. So this is expected to significantly improve the consistency between the two approaches, although of course certain differences will stay, but definitely this is a step forward towards consistency compared to the previous approach. And I think the logic is relatively straightforward, so I would not spend more time on this at this point in time, which then brings me to I believe conclusion of this part. And of course, conclusion of the parts on the EVA additional improvements, and we can focus a bit more as we received many requests and a lot of interest from different stakeholders and also Acer on providing some additional information on the methodology that we use for the estimate of hard-out premium, which are a key element also of the EVA model to reflect risk aversion of investors. Therefore, today I will also give you some more information and insight on what is done on this front. There are three key steps, of course. The idea is to reflect the risk aversion of investors, and therefore we needed also for ERA purposes a rather general, simple but effective approach that we could apply on such a pan-European assessment. And here, as it's also somehow suggested or allowed by the ERA methodology, especially Article 6.9, we opted for the same, let's say, a theoretical framework proposal from Professor Bout, which is also the same that is used and leveraged for the Belgian National Resource Adequacy Assessment, which is basically building on behavioral economics, so prospect theory and also utility theory, to combine and create a theoretical framework to estimate and calibrate hard-on premiums without requiring too much of detailed and specific quantitative assessment, I would say. And this is well suited, of course, for ERA also as an approach where we need to cover the whole perimeter and also multiple technologies. The idea is that, of course, you can start still from what we would call or refer here a WACC base, so weighted average cost of capital, which can be estimated for different investor and for different technologies based on a capital asset pricing model approach. This is also suggested by Acer actually in the Kone studies. And just give me a second. Can you hear me still? I hope so, because I think I had
Yes,
some
Gregorio,
problems.
we can hear you.
Sorry, I had some problems with the headphones, but now I can proceed like this. I wanted to say, indeed, we can start from a CAPM model approach, but of course, one of the limitations of this approach fully is that to reflect properly risk aversion, we need to include also the risks that are associated to a non-normal revenue distribution and price spikes, and this peculiar price distribution that we observe a lot, of course, when dealing with investments in electricity capacity. And therefore, the two key risk aspects that we want to account for are the what we call the model risk. So our models have a certain set of assumptions that of course, do not reflect properly how investors take decisions. These are, for example, perfect foresight, perfect market behavior, transition costs are not reflected. So we have the model risk somehow that we want to introduce explicitly in our model to overcome these limitations. And we also have the policy risk, for example, uncertainty of policies or change of political framework and landscape, which we also want to reflect, as it's very important for investors who are taking investment decisions. So if we move to the next slide, the second step is indeed, once we have established this framework, we need to understand also what are the key drivers that basically drives the risk that investors need to capture when making decisions in investing in capacity for electricity generation, specifically in Europe, of course. And here we have two key risk drivers that are captured by this approach, and that needs to be reflected in what we call then the hurdle premium. These two drivers are the revenue distribution that I briefly mentioned also before. So high volatility in revenues and different and more or less likely of occurrence of price spikes, and the dependence on the revenues based on the underlying weather conditions, which of course are different per each technology type, and especially if we distinguish between, for example, peak units, baseload generators, and so on. Of course, as you can imagine, logically, if the technology that you are considering for an investment is more subject to revenue volatility and non-normal distribution, and maybe rely highly on price spikes, you would expect to have a higher hurdle premium to justify your investment, meaning higher reward if you're facing a higher risk. As I said, this is intrinsically linked also to the technology type. If we think, for example, peaking units or CGT in comparison to maybe baseload, which could be, for example, more CCGT or even nuclear or other technologies. And of course, the second key risk driver is how much your technology is subject to what I mentioned before as model risk and policy risk. And I will give you some example also in the next slide, but of course also here there are certainly some technologies that can rely on more secure, more stable policy framework, where there are others that are still maybe facing some uncertainty when looking at the future. What is the hurdle premium then? Once we have investigated the additional risk that we cannot directly capture in the model, we can basically consolidate it in what we call a hurdle premium, which is nothing than an additional term that we can attach, let's say, or sum up to the weighted average cost of capital. And this will be, of course, technology specific, as I said, and the sum of the WACC base and the hurdle premium will constitute our hurdle rate. That's how we call it. And basically it means that viability of an investment, but also of existing capacity, is ensured if my expected return, meaning while I consider all the revenue distribution over the whole possible weather scenarios, forced outage samples, and so on, if my expected return is higher than my hurdle rate, then I would account for this investment or for this existing capacity as viable from an economic perspective. Good. In ERAA, of course, the WACC that we use, as you know, are taken from the KONE study, and these are also published in the package that is coming soon on the website of ENTSO-E. Good. Final slide on this topic. once we have established the framework, the key drivers, and also, of course, the general concept of a hurdle premium, we need to actually calibrate and transfer the framework towards a more quantitative values, of course, that we can use in the EVA model. Here, of course, I'm reporting, for example, three steps, but I definitely invite you to refer to the detailed sources here because, of course, there is more to it, but for the sake of time and complexity here, I'm just giving some example. The first step you may want to do when you want to move towards a more quantitative, pragmatic approach is to define lower and upper bounds of your hurdle premium that, according to literature research and studies and stakeholder assessment from Professor Baud, this was somehow established between a range of, let's say, around 5% to 10% maximum. Of course, this stays on a theoretical framework, so you would have the low risk technologies are in a range of 5% hurdle premium and the higher risk technology towards more 10%. And then, of course, you would classify the different technologies as low, medium, high risk based on the two key risk drivers that we described before. This is done, for example, by Professor Baud following a sequence of what-if analysis on the policy risk framework or also on other risk drivers that you can allow you to classify your technologies as low, medium, or high risk. And there is, in the end, a final calibration of your hurdle premiums that is based also then on more quantitative analysis, because of course you can start from an actual market modeling exercise when you can derive or you derive the distribution of revenues according to your weather scenarios and so on. You can have a look at the distribution and then extrapolate finally the concrete values. This, of course, was done in this context of the study specifically for the electricity-only market in Belgium and also for some Belgium-specific calibration. However, when discussing with the experts and also in strict relationship with ELIA, the Belgian TSO, it was agreed and also found out that also methodologically speaking, we can extrapolate and apply these hurdle premiums also to the ERA context, as long as the general policy framework and model framework are consistent, which is the case of ERA and European market, and also that the revenue distribution and downside risk are similar in the two contexts, which is also proven to be the case when assessing the modeling results. Which means that, just to give some numbers, of course, you will find all the hurdle premiums per each technology, both for existing units and for expansion candidates in the data set that will be published. But of course, if we move from a theoretical hurdle premium range between 5 and 10%, the actual numbers that after the calibration are rather the minimum, it's 3%, for example, for existing CCGT units, which are the lowest risk technology, as you can just make a decision to keep your CCGT for one more year in the market and just facing the FOM costs, basically. So this is the lowest risk with a 3% premium on your capital, and the highest risk is identified in investing in new OCGT capacity, for which we assign a hurdle premium of 6%. Why are they also lower than 10%? Keep in mind that this theoretical framework was given in terms of nominal values of hurdle premium, whereas when we move then to real numbers, we also need to calibrate, taking into account for expected inflation and other factors, for also taxation, according to which, of course, you would, over a long-term investment with more than 3 years, for example, you would also reduce the nominal value to a more real terms that are therefore also lower. Good. This was covering the hurdle premium topic from my side. Thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't overflow you too much with information. And now again, still me, so bear with me. the next point in the agenda is the revenue-based EVA. So we stay in the EVA framework. And I've seen also already quite a few questions in the Slido concerning this topic. So I hope I can cover some of your expectation already with the slides. Basically, let's move already to the next one where we have the background. As it was mentioned already previously, the EVA, it's probably the most complex modeling exercise that we have in ERAA, and especially a lesson learned from the first 3 ERAA cycles. We learned a lot and improved a lot, but of course we have still some challenges to face, one of which, as it was discussed today, it's also the representativity of weather scenarios in EVA. But we have other limitations, of course, or challenges rather than limitations that we need to address. The ERAA methodological framework, and especially Article 6.2, prescribes or allow us also to explore a different approach, which is the so-called assessment of individual or group of capacity, which for practicality we tend to refer as the revenue-based approach, where indeed we try to estimate and assess viability of capacity based on actual revenues of units. The goal is, of course, to develop and benchmark and understand the 2 approaches, and building on TSO experience with the national assessment to establish a revenue-based EVA on the full European perimeter, and also to see its applicability maybe for future ERA editions. Next slide, please. I know we are a bit late, but I will try to be fast, but still comprehensive. Of course, on a theoretical level, under a set of certain market assumptions, like, for example, some I mentioned before in the context of hurdle premium. So we model following perfect competition. So basically the generators bid at their marginal cost. We have perfect foresight, no forecast error on renewables or demand. And we also, of course, modeling following a market clearing perspective where the cost of shedding demand is equal to the price cap. Under this assumption, of course, the overall cost approach, which tends to minimize the total system cost based on dispatch, variable cost, and capacity cost for keeping existing units and or expanding in new capacity, as well as the cost of energy not served. Basically, minimizing this cost, it's equal then maximizing the total revenue of the system, where we can assess the inframarginal rents of generations and potentially additional revenue streams, whereas the costs are, of course, again, the fixed and variable costs of generators and also the investment costs. Good. Under this theoretical framework, of course, the key difference is that if we go to the next slide, instead of having an overall system modeling stochastic approach, which is well described in the ERAA 23 report, so I would invite you to have a look there. The concept of the revenue-based approach is instead to leverage multiple iterations of the same economic dispatch model to assess viability. This you see in an example of the iterative loop in the left-hand side. So we can start directly from the national trend scenario, which we highlighted before, to build economic dispatch models that we can run iteratively. And in every iteration, we can extract basically price and generation for each assets or group of assets, technology specific, to estimate some economic parameters, which could be net present value or internal rate of return, for example. These, of course, take into account the CapEx, FOM, hurdle rates, and the whole set of techno-economic parameters, or CONE data, as we refer to perform an EVA check at each iteration, and then make at each iteration a certain amount of commissioning or decommissioning decision to then proceed with iteration number n+1. And at the end, depending on certain criteria, define a certain final iteration, the final capacity post-EVA, which similarly to the overall cost approach will define the reference scenario post-EVA that can be used for the final run of economic dispatch models and retrieve adequacy results. I think the loop is rather clear, straightforward. So ED runs, prices, generation, revenue check, commission, decommission decision, next iteration. And on the right-hand side, you can see an example of, okay, how we model commission and decommission decisions. Well, of course, I'm not going too much into detail for the sake of time now, but this is a possible example where you have, if your capacity is viable at ERT, of course, you would keep it at least for that year. If it's non-viable for that year, you either mothball or decommission, depending on the foresight that you have on future years. If the capacity is viable, you may also assess the opportunity to invest in more capacity of the same technology type. Of course, there are different logics, different criteria that are also being assessed by the experts. So it's just an example. It doesn't mean that this will be the final solution, but there are multiple tools also being assessed. What is interesting is that you can play around a lot with this approach. Indeed, not only using different criteria or decision for investors, but also you can follow different perspective on the horizon. You can start from the year one, or also start from the end retrospectively. Good, then final slide, very quick.
Hi, Gregory.
Sorry, Lucas, stop me then.
Yeah, I suggest that I stop you. I know that there is also a consolidated list of opportunities and challenges. I would welcome then stakeholders to take a look at this after the webinar, because we will publish this. I just want to also keep some time for at least a short Q&A session. I will commit to stay a few minutes longer just to close this webinar, but just to make sure that we can address at least few of the most raised questions, to address those stakeholders interactions who are engaging with us. So a big thanks to you. I'm just trying to quickly proceed to this session. I see that it's not appearing the interactions from the slide or this platform. So I suggest that I will just voice out these questions, which are now the most upvoted ones. I have highlighted now for all the attendees the first question which was raised, and I see a link with the also most upvoted question. So the most upvoted question was sounding as if we could further explain the differences between the new revenue-based EVA approach, what Gregory explained, and I think that it was quite detailed, and we could elaborate a little bit longer. But at the same time, it's also linked to the question by Anonymous, which I have highlighted. If the results of new revenue-based approach will be published and used to create the central reference scenario that will go as input to the adequacy models. So for this two questions, I would say combined, I would ask if Javier, you are still here. Maybe you could give a brief feedback on this.
Yes, thank you. So thank you also to the stakeholders for your interactions and your questions. On these questions, I think, as Lucas said, they were covered in Gregorio's presentation, but specifically, if we're going to base the central reference scenarios on the new EVA approach, what I would like to say here is that today this webinar, the aim of this webinar is to show all of you what we are working on at the moment, and I think also it was highlighted in Gregorio's presentation that we are working on this revenue-based approach. But it's work in progress. It's a development for the ERA project, and even if it's an approach that has been applied by some TSOs in their national assessments, and we are working, of course, very actively with those TSOs that are member of the ERA team also, and building on their experience. We still need to test the approach to see if we can apply it at a European scale, and potentially adopt it in future ERA editions. So as I say, it's work in progress, and we need to continue testing before taking this decision. Lucas, I see you're speaking, but you're muted.
Okay, thank you for warning.
Okay.
I was just saying that I see one additional question will be addressed by you as well. I'm trying to highlight this as well.
Okay.
The EVA results affected by the national estimate submitted by the TSO. So are EVA results affected by the national estimate submitted by the TSOs? And if so, shouldn't the national estimates be based on the assumptions that there are no capacity remuneration mechanisms implemented, since one objective is to see whether CRMs are needed? Could you maybe also reflect quickly upon this question as well?
Yes, this is a very good question, an important one, because well, ERA methodology requires that the scenarios are aligned with the national and European objectives, and this means that normally the national estimates reflects the national energy and climate plans of each member states that are and this data is provided to the ERA through the TSOs, so they are providing us their NCPs. And this, of course, affects the EVA results because those plans include renewables, demand trajectories, and other assumptions that are not treated by the EVA. Like, for example, renewables are not subject to EVA. Hydro units or nuclear units are treated as policy and not subject to the EVA. So in the final post-EVA scenario, they remain the same as the national targets. So yes, this starting point affects, of course, the EVA outcome and the final scenario. And on the capacity mechanisms, at the moment, we only consider the currently awarded capacity mechanism contracts in the scenario. And of course, the possible future capacity mechanism contracted capacity is not included in the scenario. So in this term, it's not affecting the EVA results.
All right. Thank you very much. I see there are a number of questions also raised by some people on the platform. We are already 3 minutes actually after our deadline, but since we have really good engagement, I would like to pick another question as well, as I see that there are still a number of people holding around. But then I would suggest that we would try to catch or pick now a last question here, and then to address the other questions bilaterally if we have received the names of the people whom we could engage. Otherwise, of course, you can always reach us individually, and we would be more than happy to reflect. I just trying to take a look if then I would say that I would go just straight to the another one, the most upvoted question, which is, I believe, this one: if value stacking of certain technologies such as batteries be reflected in the revenue-based EVA approach, something on the revenue-based specific. So, Gregorio, I would give the floor to you maybe to address this question.
Yes, sure. Definitely the possibility to stack additional revenue streams and also, let me say, value drivers for capacity. It's one of the possible advantages that the revenue-based EVA should facilitate. This is also mentioned in the last slide that we had to skip. So definitely that's a point. I have to say, as you see, as we stated, now we are still developing the general backbone and framework of the whole revenue-based approach. So we're definitely focusing more on the energy-only market perspective to start. But definitely for future editions, we are considering, or we will considering, the inclusion of additional revenue streams, which could be, for example, heat revenues, which are, by the way, already reflected in ERA 23 and also this year. But for the rest of ancillary services or other ways for capacity to capture values, it's probably something to be discussed for future developments. If you're interested in the topic, I would suggest to have a look. There is a nice white paper from TenNet Netherlands TSO that was published, I don't remember if it's earlier this year or last year, where they really do a great analysis on different possible revenue streams and value drivers for capacity. So that could be, for example, give some hints on in the future some elements we may reflect on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Gregoria. And yes, I really see also that some people need to leave and they are disconnecting, and just to respect also the time to minimize the delay here, I would suggest that we would close and Q&A session at this point. We would try to then answer some of the questions still on the Slido platform for the ones who are still connected there in written, and in case there would be a further need to reach us, please do not hesitate. Now, I would be trying to close this webinar. Also, on some takeaways, I will do exactly the same thing as with the Gregorius on the revenue-based approach. I would leave for you to read these ones, so sort of a synopsis of this webinar, and I will not dive into the specific details. What I would maybe stop for a moment is just to mention that we are progressing, and today we are focusing on the webinar on the methodological insights. The solid blue milestone here marked with the today tag. From this point, as the preparations are concluding and we are finishing the test runs, as it was presented today, that the weather scenario selections preliminary outcomes are available, we can start building the final models and run them, which would follow with the result analysis and the report drafting. And in November, you can follow our media, and we will definitely announce when we have ERA 2024 publication issued. Before that, around mid-August in coming days, we will release a post-consultation data release on our website, so you can consult also the latest state of our data used in the models. As discussed, the transparency and the quality of the data will be refined and improved, so I would welcome also you to follow this release as well. In addition, in addition to that, in coming days, 1 or 2 days, you can expect also the recording of this webinar and the material to be published alongside as well on our website, which is not marked in this presentation. But last, and what is most important, what I would like to say is that the last milestone here marked. So after we will publish the ERA 2024 report in November, we will hold another webinar on the results. But at the same time, we are, as every year, we are launching ERA report consultation, where we are seeking for your feedback and perspectives on various aspects, on the data which we use, on the methodologies which we apply, and on the results which you see. So if you would have any particular interest to provide the structured feedback, or including the methodologies which we presented today, I would also welcome you participating in this consultation at the end of the year, where we are consolidating overall all views from the stakeholders and reflecting on our methodologies and refining then the following ERA iteration based on this feedback which we received. Not to say that even today questions which we have received, of course, we are reflecting continuously, but to have a bit more formal and structured consolidation of all the feedbacks, we are also launching this consultation at the end of the year. Said this, I would say a big thanks to all the presenters today who participated, presented, and even more who prepared this material. So a big thanks goes to you from my side, and definitely from stakeholders attending this meeting. And at the same time, a big thanks to all stakeholders who participated today, and especially who engaged on the Slido. This big thanks goes from my side, and I can definitely say it also goes from all the presenters and people involved in ERA. So we truly appreciate your engagement in this webinar. And with this, I would say that I keep the fingers crossed to see all of you also in another webinar, as mentioned at the end of the year on ERA 24 results. And I truly hope that the engagement level will be the same and maybe even higher than today. But even today, this was a fantastic experience for me. So a big thanks to all of you, and I wish you a pleasant evening. And yes, thank you for joining, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.